Hey guys, in today's episode, we're gonna go through how to data log with boot mode. It's gonna take a little bit of time. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of new features in the dashboard. I'll go through all of them. So grab a coffee or beer or whatever your favorite drink is. Sit back and watch this video. Hey guys, it's Jenin here. Today we're gonna go into the boot mode app and we're gonna show you how to data log the car. So dashboard is the screen that you wanna go into, and basically when you launch into the app, you wanna be connected. BM3 Wi-Fi adapter is in the OBDII port. Once you plug it in, Wi-Fi is gonna show up, but you won't have access to the car because you have to press the start button 3 times quickly on these G series. On the F series, you just get your ignition on. So basically, make sure your gas level gauge is showing a level and you know your ignition is on. The app is showing green, meaning we're connected, shows the VIN. Tap on it, I'm already logged in, so it's not gonna ask me to log in again. And we'll go into the menu, go into the dashboard. You'll see by default, there's 2 screens in the dashboard added just to show you that you can have multiple screens. Along the bottom of the dashboard, there's some dots that indicate how many dash screens you've got. So if you tap on that, so by default we have 2, and then you can add as many dash screens as you like. You can take them away, you can add additional ones. So if you close out of that, we started out this demo with 5 screens on the bottom. Now we've got 7 of them. The last 2 are empty. You can add a gauge in there. Let's say ambient pressure. I can make the gauge large, so it's easier to see. So you basically take a gauge or a channel that you want to keep a close eye on. So ambient pressure is not really something that you would want to keep maybe a close eye on, but boost is something that you would want to see, have a big number on the dashboard for your mobile screen. You also have, I put the intake temperature. The pedal really, I'm just adding it here so I can show you how quick the refresh rate is in our new app, how quickly the data is flowing. We actually fixed in this latest version 207, there was some reports of phones getting hot, so that's also been fixed. So if you're running your dash for a long time, you won't have any issues with a hot phone. It was on the iPhones. Coming back into this, we can data log using the dashboard 2 ways. You can do it manually. You start the log by double tapping anywhere on the dashboard. You double tap to end the log. That basically has recorded data in a CSV file in the phone storage. And if you have internet at that time, your data log is automatically uploaded to your cloud account. At that point, your tuner can see the log. They can provide a map update for you to flash again. So in terms of custom tuning, it makes things really easy for the tuner and for yourself to not have to manage these data logs, attach them in the emails, send the email over, they have to then download this CSV file, open it in a charting utility of some kind, and everything is just nicely integrated with the cloud and it's automated. On the iPhones, you can actually keep your internet and connection to the car at the same time. So as you do your logs, they'll be automatically uploaded to the cloud. On Androids, the logs are saved to the phone while you're connected to the car. And because you have no internet at the same time on Androids, the moment you disconnect from the car and you're back on your mobile data plan, they'll get uploaded by the app to the cloud. So there's a little bit of a variance between Android and iPhone in that respect. The other way to do the data logs is using the auto log feature on the bottom. So what that does is it's using the actual accelerator pedal to trigger the start and stop of the log. So show you what that means. So I'll enable that and I'll just go down on the accelerator pedal and you'll see data logging start across the top. So there we go. I just went all the way down on the pedal, logging is running, and the moment I let off, there's a little bit of a timeout that we add for cars that are manual transmission so that they can lift off the pedal and get back into throttle so that the log doesn't end at that point. If we just ended it the moment you lifted the pedal, every time a manual transmission car was shifting, it would end the log for that particular run. So we added a little bit of a timeout. So now I'll let off. Default timeout is 3 seconds, and you can configure that in dashboards settings. I can show you those settings in a little bit. So I'll let off now. And about 3 seconds later, this data log is ended, and just going to turn off the auto logging now, and we can go into the actual data logs and look at the list. So it's actually interesting. So here in the building, the phone is using mobile data to be online. And for some reason, because there's a lot of metal in this area where we're filming, in that split moment, internet was going in and out. And it's actually still happening. But it's actually cool to show that even without internet, under the data log screen, you have cloud and local tabs across the top. So just to go in detail about what these mean. Local tab will record and show you all of the data logs that you do, no matter if you have internet or not. These are files that have been done at some point in time, and if you have internet, they'll end up in the cloud account and they'll be uploaded. So because our internet here is really spotty and it's going in and out, you can see the connectivity bar at the top showing the little cloud icon going red and green and red and green. It just means that the internet is really, really spotty here. The left icon left of that cloud is the connection with the car, and that's rock solid. So if we go in here, we can see that on April 13th, 2023, which is today, at 11:36, 2 minutes ago, I did a data log that was 29 seconds long. You have some swipe menus here, like on many other screens. You can delete the log. So this now deleted the actual CSV file that's sitting on the phone because I did it in the local tab of the data log screen. When you delete something from the cloud tab, it'll delete it off of your server account. So basically the only other thing available here on the local tab is a download button. What this will do is it'll take that CSV out of phone storage, it'll put it in a public folder, and then you can share the CSV file with someone if you really want to. Really, with boot mode, you're never dealing with CSV files. There's no need unless you want to do that for some reason. Only thing I can think of is maybe use a different charting tool, and there's so many of them out there, so you may have a preference towards one of those charting tools. So that's why you would use it, but otherwise you would really never download the CSVs. And if you tap any of the icons on the right side, you can actually get a chart of that data log. So we'll go into the last one. The logs are always rendered in this landscape mode so that you get a little more screen real estate to work with. If you tap anywhere on this log, you're going to see all the channels that we had enabled for data logging showing values anywhere I am in that log. So because the car is not running, most of these values will not really show any meaningful data. But for the demonstration to be complete, I will actually start the car and show you something happening. So here we go. So I'm gonna just basically show you how, with the car running, how this whole thing looks, how the shift indicator shows up when I get close to red line. By default, the shift indicator is set up to go off at around 6,700 RPM. Excuse me for the battery being low.
I'm sorry.
And I'll just trigger the log manually in this case, so double tap on the screen, I'll stab the throttle, and we'll see the shift indicator come up. Woo! That's here we go. All right, so we have two wide open throttle data logs. I will end that log, and now I'll go ahead and show you how that data log looks like. So we have the two tabs across the top. We can see that at 11:42, that's 4 minutes ago, that's an old log on the cloud tab, meaning the most recent one, which was done at 11:46, hasn't uploaded yet. So if you go to the local tab though, you can see that the log is already there. I went to local tab and I came back to the cloud, and now I can see that the log from 11:46 a.m. is there as the most recent log. The one that we had prior to that, 11:42 a.m. is right below it. So we see that that log was approximately 14 seconds long, and in order to see what's in that log, you can click on the share button. You'll get a link to bootmod3, which will take you to a browser view of this data log. So provided you have internet, you can view it. You can view the chart right in the app as well by clicking on that icon on the right side. So the log will actually chart in this landscape mode, and you can see across the top we have the name for that log. So if you rename it, that'll change. And the actual data is here for the entire duration of that log. So this actual screen supports pinch and zoom. You can zoom in any part of the log, right? There's a button that shows in the top right corner to reset your zoom. So if you want to go back to the original view, you can do that very quickly. And then on the right side, you have all the channels that were data logged. These channels are the channels that are selected for data logging. They are not the channels that were in the dashboard necessarily. So you can see that you have a lot of channels data logged on the right side, but your dashboard only had maybe 5 screens. Each screen had maybe 2 to 5 gauges, so that would be about 20 or 30 channels in the dashboard, but your actual log has way more than that. So we actually split those things up in the app, and you can see in the data log settings when you're choosing your channels that you can choose up to 70 something channels to data log concurrently from your car. But then the dashboard, you can say, I don't really care about all that stuff in the data logs. I just want to see what my boost is, what my coolant temp is, what my intake temperature is, maybe see a little bit about ignition timing corrections. Anything really you want to zoom in on, you would put it in your dashboard so you can view it as you're running the car. One additional thing you can do in any given data log, you can go into that gear-based icon, which will bring up a configuration screen with the listing of all the channels that that particular log had, and you can basically toggle any of them off or on. Let's say you don't care about 59 of the 70 channels that are in the log, you want to see just 11 or 12. You can turn them off, turn them on, search them by name at the top. When you go back, the chart will redraw and it'll have only the selections that you want to see for that particular log. So once you come back, the app will go back into portrait mode and you're back on the cloud data log screen. Basically, similar to the local tab, you have the download button to download the CSV. If you want to share the CSV or open it in a charting tool other than the boot mode. You have the share button, which will copy the link to that log in the cloud to your phone's clipboard. And then on the right side, you have the delete if you want to get rid of that log, and you can change the name on that log as well if you want to name it something specific so you can refer to it at a later point in time. Down here is a little green circular button. We use this in a lot of screens in the app. It's a little quick menu to do other things other than what's on the screen already. You can delete all of the logs out of your cloud account. Also, if you have a CSV file from a friend, you can take that CSV file and add it to your account and chart it inside your own app. One more thing I want to show you is how you actually configure things in the dashboard other than doing it right in the dashboard. You can go into the menu. There's a dashboard menu inside of it, and there's this dashboard configuration menu. So the configuration screen actually provides a way for you to configure the look and feel of the dashboard in 2 different ways. So you can change that. The default way is to see the gauges and what I just showed you, but you can actually go into a list view if you prefer that, and the dashboard will change and look basically like that. So all the channels that you had before, except it's a very flat layout. It shows all your channels, shows the min and max peak recall values for you so you can quickly get to those and view them. The other things are you can choose your channels that you want to capture in the data log. So these channels in this configuration screen, this is all the channels that you could possibly log with BM3 on your car's currently flashed software. So you have 3 tabs in here. The default channels are basically stuff that came in the software from the factory. Many of the scan tools will also have access to this. The advanced tab is more customized data logging channels that provide more in-depth data into how the tune is running. They're also called RAM channels or RAM variables. So we've exposed a whole bunch of them that are there by default in the software of the car, and there's also custom BM3 channels as part of that tab. And then there's another tab called Other. There's hundreds of channels under Other that are also useful in some cases. You might find like a battery voltage there. There are literally hundreds in here. And if you're curious about if your particular car has a certain channel that you want to look at, instead of just scrolling through endlessly, there's a search bar at the top and you can type in, let's say, Valvetronic. And this will give you everything with VVT, Valvetronic, in it. So I'll add 2 of those. So now I added them for data logging. They won't show up in your dashboard. So whatever you add in here, you're adding it for data logging, but not necessarily for dashboard. So if you want to see it in the actual dashboard, let me switch my dash to gauges. You basically have to go into one of the screens that has some space, and you can see that that channel we just enabled VVT, actual valve eccentric angle VVT is there, but it's not enabled for dashboard viewing. So you can enable it for dashboard viewing as well. And now you've got your Valvetronic eccentric angle position shown in the dashboard. And this will also be in your data log because you set that up in the other screen. So I'll go back to that screen again one more time. There's one more menu there for data log settings. In this menu, I'll just go quickly to the bottom here. There's a shift indicator, engine RPM. I mentioned in the dashboard you have a shift overlay that shows up and you can configure it based on gear and RPM. So you can do that in here. Gears 1 to 6, you can move that RPM and set your shift points anywhere, so when your dash is running, it'll actually go red and give you an indicator that you should shift. Other than that, there are other settings here which you can use to change the units in the dashboard. So if you're accustomed to imperial units, PSI, Fahrenheit for temperature, basically you just change at a high level. You could go to units, change it to imperial. If you're more accustomed to metric units, you want to see your temperature with Celsius and your boost with hectopascals or in pascals, you can change that in that particular units menu. And this will change the setting globally. But then there are other settings here which you can also override from the defaults. For example, for pressure, let's say if you're a tuner, you might prefer seeing all the units in these logs in absolute units. The DME, all the tables, when you're tuning, every single table uses absolute units for everything. So you may want to prefer that, but usually people leave it in relative. You want to know your boost based on, what your current ambient pressure is. So if you're running 20 PSI of boost, you tell somebody you're running 20 PSI, that means it's 20 PSI above ambient pressure, whatever that is. If you're at high altitude, it'll be less. If you're at sea level, it'll be around 14.5. So when you're talking to your buddies, the units you're actually giving them are in most cases in relative terms, relative to the ambient pressure. So you would keep that in most cases relative. And then there were times in the past where people wanted to have a global override for, I want all of my pressure units to be in PSI because I'm used to that, but I live in Europe and we use Celsius for temperature. We don't use Fahrenheit. So you can leave all the defaults selected, but for temperature, you can indicate that you always want to use, for any channel that shows you temperature, you want to override it and show it in Celsius. So if you do that, all of your data logs from this point will data log any temperature channel in metric Celsius. Similar thing for speed, similar thing for anything torque related or flow units, metric would be kilograms per hour, for example, and imperial in pounds per minute. There's actually a couple more things here. There's target ECU on single DME cars like this G80. It's always DME, you don't get any other options. But if you have a V8, BMW V8s come with 2 DMEs on the motor, and you can enable logging of just one individual bank, or you can enable concurrent logging of both banks, both sides of the motor, which is typically what you would do anyways. And then at the very bottom, if you recall me mentioning how auto logging triggers, that triggering of how the pedal kicks off your log is actually defined here at the bottom. So accelerator pedal by default set to 70% down. So if you go past 70% of the pedal down, your logging will start. The bottom value for duration after pedal lift, by default it's 3 seconds. What does that mean? When I lift off the pedal, 3 seconds after that, unless I go back into the pedal, it'll end the log. So just to say that one more time, if I go past 70% or whatever your accelerator pedal threshold is, when auto log is on, your logging will start. When I let off, the dashboard will wait for that duration amount of time, which is by default 3 seconds, before it ends the log. But it'll actually continue logging if within those 3 seconds, you get back into the throttle. So you've got a manual transmission car and you're doing your shift and you've got, a lazy shift. Even if it takes you a second or 2 seconds to make that shift, it won't end your log because you lifted off the throttle to make that shift happen. So you can adjust that to whatever you need. On automatics, really, you could reduce that down to 1 second. There's no need for 3, but we keep a 3-second delay by default. So one more thing I actually want to show you in the dashboard is, other than quick tap on a gauge and you can make a gauge small or large, you can also go into the dash layout mode where you can move the gauges around from screen to screen, or you can move them within the same screen. So I'll actually go into a screen that has couple of gauges. I'll tap there, and I can tap that move gauge selection. So if I do that, it'll go into this mode where I can tap any gauge and just drag it over and change spots, right? The other option is, so that's for moving them within this particular screen. But let's say I wanted to move that gauge to another screen where I had more space. Let's say I wanted to move it to screen number 5 in the dash. What you can do is you can tap that gauge, it'll go down to the bottom. I'll tap this one as well. And then you can scroll over to that 5th screen and drop in both those gauges there. Once you're happy, you hit exit and your dash now looks like that. The other way to get into that mode is if you press anywhere and hold, it'll get into that mode. So that's another way to just trigger the same layout mode. One more thing that I just remembered that I needed to show you is this configure channel. So any gauge in the dash that you already have placed in that spot that you like, you can go in and say, I want to configure this particular gauge a little more than using the defaults. For example, for coolant temperature, there's no decimal points for coolant temperature, but if you wanted, you could get a little bit of a decimal point if that particular channel supports more than 0 decimals, for example. So by default, coolant temp has no decimals, but if we go into ignition timing, you can see that the precision or the number of decimals that it uses is 1 by default. So you can go to 0 if you want to see less decimals. I don't know why you would do that, but you have the option of doing it. You can also set some channels to be refreshing in the dashboard less often than they do. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but one of these things has come up a number of times that people wanted to have less refresh on some values. So we've added some options there. Instead of real time, which is default, you may want to see it just update once at 1 hertz, once a second, or 10 times a second. So you can slow that down. You can also change the units on a particular gauge. So if you recall, under dashboard datalog configuration, you had a way to globally change everything to imperial or everything to metric. You could do any temperature that ever shows in the dashboard, you can change it to metric or imperial. So here, you can go even more specific and you can say this channel. I don't care, I know I set my temperature to be metric because I like Celsius instead of Fahrenheit, but this particular temperature on this channel, I want to see it in Fahrenheit. Whatever reason, whatever that may be, you can do that in there. So there's other settings there for how the gauge is looking, whether you want to see a pointer on it or not, whether the gauge type is default, which is like a half moon kind of shape. You can go full radial, you can do a horizontal progress bar and a different kind of a progress bar. So you can change the gauge type, and then in here, there are a few other settings for specific channel that you're looking at. You can set the minimum and maximum values for the threshold. Basically, if you say, my tuner has built me a tune that always runs max 20 PSI on this particular octane. I want to know if my boost is ever going over that. I don't want to look at my logs. I don't want to, review all this stuff in detail. I just want the dash to tell me if my boost went over 20 PSI or 22 PSI. So you can set some threshold value and save it, and then when you run the dash without even data logging, you'll have a little, so if it's your boost channel, where your min and max thresholds are, your max you set in this configuration to 20 PSI. If that goes over 20 PSI, you'll have a little warning triangle there right next to the max value, which you can tap on, and you can see what that value was. What was the highest value for your boost that happened during that data logging or dashboard session. And then finally at the bottom you have settings for customizing the look and feel of the gauge. You can change the pointer color, you can change the sweep color, number of other colors. So that ends our dashboard and data logging tutorial. If there are any questions you guys want to ask us, you guys want to discuss any other detail in the data log, going more into the data logs themselves and explain how they work, what do they mean, what are the things to pay attention to in your tune, let us know in the comments and we'll try to cover that in the next session. If you want to learn more about what we're doing with custom ROM, subscribe to the channel and we'll follow up. I can't.
Yes, you can.
Hey guys, and the logs are always rendered in this landscape. Whoop. Nice.